Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.
Jason Hartman has helped thousands of people realize their dreams of financial independence through real estate investing. And now he's got an unbeatable offer for you. He's offering you his proven course that thousands have used to build an income property empire, and it's free to the first 100 Financial Survival Network listeners. Just go to jasonhartman.com/Lutz and sign up today. For cash flow and capital appreciation, there's nothing else like it. Make your money work as hard as you do by building an income property empire. Real estate is America's proven investment. Go to jasonhartman.com/Lutz and get your free course today. That's Jason, HARTMAN.com/Lutz. Thousands have paid nearly $300 for this course, but for this short period of time, you can get it free. You are listening to the FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. I'm Kerry Lutz with Danielle Park on 1230 WBZT. What's going on in the world of finance? New Fed chairperson on the way, probably chairwoman. And let's talk about it now with Danielle. Danielle, how are you?
Hey, Kerry, how are you?
Good. So what's going on here? Interest rates go up, Dow goes up, oil goes up, and it's all one big happy world, isn't it?
Oh, it's the same old nonsense, honestly. So you get a report out of the San Francisco Fed yesterday confirming what we already know. It's almost an insult to anyone with any intelligence that, finding that QE has done very little, minuscule effect in their judgment in terms of economic benefit for the economy. So they ran the numbers and they said, okay, maybe it's added like a 0.13 to annual growth, GDP growth, since we've been rolling out these trillions in bond buying stuff over the last 3 years. Now, I go on to point out that that's not full of cost accounting, because if you look at the other negative impacts that have happened, you could argue very well that it's been a negative economic drag, not even positive. But they just look at the pure numbers and they say, okay, we think we've added a minuscule amount. But I think of it as, okay, with Janet Yellen as top runner, or Larry Summers, but Janet Yellen as top runner for potential replacement for the Bernanke at the head of the committee, you have her home-based Fed issuing a report concluding yesterday that QE is not meeting the mark or hitting the expectation of what they'd hoped it would do. So surely that must be strategic in the sense of, released in support of this whole push by the Fed that they've been talking about in the last few months of, hey, we have to start thinking about slowing the pace of purchase, right? So this report certainly supports that idea, in other words, that if they slow the taper, not much negative will come of it, because frankly it wasn't adding much growth in the first place. And then so you have a negative tone to equity markets this morning because there's more disappointing retail sales, business inventories are flat, most companies outside of autos are reducing their inventory. So this is all this slowing growth theme. And then in the last hour, Kerry, you get some headline, ridiculous headline, which we're so used to seeing now. The Fed's Lockhart, who is a non-voting member, of the Federal Reserve, says, oh, wait, I don't know if there's enough evidence as far as whether to taper in September or not, I'm not sure. Well, great. So the algos go wild on, wow, maybe they're not going to taper. I mean, it's just the most insane stuff. So the U.S. dollar is not even batting an eye. It's still up strongly today, which, again, defies this idea that they're not going to taper. I think that they are going to taper of necessity. I don't think that they would choose to stop pumping liquidity, but at this point it's become politically unpalatable. It's not got a lot of evidence in support of the continuation. The market risks are compounding the longer they keep it up. And I think that, they just have to concede that they've done their worst and, not much has flown from it. So it's this, I believe they're going to start to taper, as I say, out of necessity, and all this nonsense of headlines from non-voting members saying they're not sure if they will start in September or not is just smoke. It's just nonsense. And unfortunately, we live in a world where markets are not free price discovery mechanisms, where they have very little to do with reality, and where they're just kind of a Ponzi of their own. So you get one good headline, you get a bunch of computer traders piling on, record leverage, record margin. It's just a total recipe for disaster, and that's where we're at.
Hey, well, on another point is they're running out of securities that they can purchase. And like you said, the fact of the matter is unemployment has not been helped at all by quantitative easing. Yeah, maybe you could argue that bank profits have been helped by it, but now maybe banks will actually have to go out and make quality loans and look at quality collateral, and actually have to go and do what banks traditionally did to turn profits, and they'll have to stop trading and looking at buying up mortgage-backed securities at a discount and then selling them off to the Fed and making an arbitrage profits. Banks actually might have to behave as banks and run a business.
That's a good point. And here's something that I've noticed in the last while. All the talk about too big to fail and breaking up big banks, regulators, I think that they are breaking themselves up. And I'll tell you why. They've realized they're no longer in this free money, free levering up everyone and their dog, F the poor, as Michael, in The Big Short, Michael Lewis's book talks about how the whole subprime fiasco was premised on this founding business model of F the poor, and it was to lever up poor people who couldn't afford, to buy things and to convince them that they could, for a short period of time, own these things. So the banks had this wonderful, profitable run as they blew up the rest of the world. Well, since then, it's no longer as easy to do because there's an aversion to debt, because there is less money in the world to even go around, and because of the sort of the general shift in sentiment and behavior against some of that risk-seeking behavior. So what's happening is banks are actually breaking themselves up. I noticed, for example, that TD Waterhouse, as an example, sold off their U.S. Investment Council division a couple of years ago. They didn't want to be in that space any longer, and they're doing the same thing in Canada in the last little while. So what's happening is that they're looking at, areas where in the good old days, they could cross-sell the bejesus out of everything, right? And they would lever it up and make money everywhere they looked. Commodities, stockpiling. They were just, having an orgy of whatever they wanted to do. Well, now as there's less appetite, less interest, less money, and more regulation, and the DOJ is starting to actually throw some charges around, they're like, oh, and that hearing that they had recently on the commodities fixing, Goldman and JP Morgan.
Aluminium. They were fixing aluminium. Aluminium. So that's my Irish relatives call it that.
Right.
So anyway, aluminium. Yes.
They're backing out of all that.
Yeah.
And so they're pairing themselves off because it's like they're chewing off their arms because they realize they got monstrously large, far too big, and far too inefficient in a slower growth, slower demand world. And so they're retrenching themselves, and it's a healthy process, but it's kind of it's a long time coming. Kerry, long time coming. Amazingly slow to get this stuff done. And but I guess the good news is that it is happening all the same, and that means that they will go back to more sustainable business models. And consumers in the U.S. are paying down their credit card debt at the best record and pace that we've seen in years. So the consumer's slowly figuring out that having money is different than having credit available. And I think that, it's like that clip I put on also a few days ago about, the urge to downsize. Much like what you did moving from New York to Florida, there's a whole exodus of population moving from high housing price areas and high living standard areas to lower areas. And the United States is such a vast and wonderful country in that respect. You have such diverse geography and, pockets of places where people can come. So you're seeing a lot of migration, baby boomers, and, what we need is mobility of labor, also. But as that all moves, it'll help sort of fix the bloated areas.
Hey, and let me make it clear. I migrated from a high-cost state to a low-cost state, but my quality of living and my standard of living actually improved. I've got a pool in this house and slightly less living area by design, but my cost per square foot is substantially less. And I mean, I'm renting right now for personal reasons with an option to buy, but in terms of standard of living, it's a newer house built in 06, so I actually come out on top. So, and it's within walking distance to Starbucks, which my old house was not. So right there, that's an improvement.
That's it. So if we could just get Starbucks to pay some corporate tax, then we would be, that much further ahead. But
well, that's in England. They're paying it here in the U.S. Don't forget sales taxes too.
It seems kind of sketchy to me. I ever since I looked over the report of those numbers, I read the book on Starbucks. I was encouraged by some of their founding principles. They do try and do fair trade, coffee and all that, but I don't know. I think, the anarchy in corporations in the last few years, the complete turning their back on any sort of sense of corporate responsibility has been quite repulsive to me, actually, to see.
Well, Danielle, come on. These tax policies that are in place in multiple countries are downright irrational, confiscatory, especially in the U.S., where we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, and it's driven companies, corporations to have to engage in this hodgepodge, hopscotch to help reduce their corporate tax rate. We could have an argument that there shouldn't be a corporate tax anyway because the consumer winds up paying for it anyway. And look, GE can afford to have high-rises, skyscrapers full of accountants and tax lawyers, so they pay zero. And they've, in my lifetime, your lifetime, they've never paid any tax. I, on the other hand, as a small business person, have been paying it through the wazoo. So let's just get rid of it so nobody pays it. And then we'll all, as individuals, pay the tax. And let's get rid of it.
It's in theory, and I agree with you. I am always paying all sorts of tax. Like, I pay tons of tax. In Canada, our average tax rate is more than 45% for high-income earners, on top of consumption tax, on top of retail sales tax, property tax. I mean, tons and tons of tax. But, what really angers me is not that I pay tax. I accept that as part of my civic duty in a society where I want people to have a decent standard of living, and I want there to be some social safety net. But I think that in a global economy where all the governments were essentially captured by corporate interests, and primarily financial interests, and people that were extractive in their policies, not concerned with putting back to communities, but extracting out profits from everywhere in the world, it's just really that no one's left to be responsible in the domestic economy, because everybody can justify that they're a global economy, that they're answerable to shareholders, that they don't, that their duty lies somewhere else other than, the world in which they function. And so you can argue that corporations shouldn't pay any taxes, but I know I sure as hell are, and I know that everyone with the most expensive accountants and lawyers, ends up getting away with murder, and the rest of us are left. And someone's got to pay for stuff. Infrastructure must be maintained.
Let's do this, okay? Let's do what Martin Armstrong said, okay? Let's not have any income tax for anybody. Let's just print the difference, okay? Whatever the government needs, let's print it, okay? Because that way we all pay the inflation tax and everybody pays equally in the form of decreased purchasing power of whatever their fiat currency is. We're all taxed equally in that respect. And then we never notice it anyway, because it's a stealth tax and we all go about our merry way. I think that's the right way. And then we can fire all those frigging revenue agents that we all love to hate anyway. I mean, I'm kind of sick of them myself. I'm sick of being a wage slave. Anyway, we need to take a break. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. We're with Danielle Park on 1230 WBZT. Hi, it's Kerry Lutz. I recently decided to move my retirement account into physical precious metals to hedge against the coming times. If you want to move an existing retirement account into physical precious metals that you can hold in your hand, tax-free, there's no company that can do it more quickly and efficiently than Regal Assets. It took them just 24 hours to open my new IRA account, and all I had to do was fill out one simple form. The best part is that Regal Assets does all the work for you. They cover the setup and administrative costs for 2013. If you're interested in making the same move I did, call 855-678-6620, 855-678-6620. That's 855-678-6620, or visit them at regalassets.com. You'll be glad you did, and tell them Kerry sent you. And we are back on the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. We're talking with Danielle Park on 1230 WBZT. So, Danielle, what about this concept? We just inflate the difference, say the heck with it, because we're partially doing that now anyway. Every country in the world is running a deficit. Every country in the world is inflating their currency. So why not just be done with it? We can get rid of these ridiculous income tax systems and, provincial taxes, VATs, all that stuff. Let's just be done with it. Isn't there a certain perverse logic to that?
No, I don't think so, Kerry. Sorry. I mean, I don't even agree that they're inflating their currency. In fact, in a global race for diminishing exports, everyone is desperate to lower their currency. I mean, look at the rupee. The rupee's recently fallen to levels not seen since 2000 and be earlier than that. So purchasing power is everything in this global economy, and until you have wage parity, I mean, really that's what it comes down to. Why have we lost so many good-paying jobs? Why do we have such diminished capacity in our consumption in this country, in the West? Because people are still prepared to work for food. Look at China. The wage growth in China is up 78% since 2005. So they are no longer the lowest cost producer, and guess what? They're losing tons of business now. Their economy's suffering, not just because there's a downshift in global demand everywhere, but because the demand that is there, the manufacturing is seeking out, Bangladesh, Vietnam. I've been noticing things that we've ordered, anything big box in the last while, is coming from those countries, no longer so much from China. So as long as there's someone in the world that's willing to work for a bowl of rice, which is essentially what happens in many of those countries, we are going to continue to see downward pressure on wages. We're going to continue to see a race to the bottom on currency because everybody wants to make stuff cheaper than the other. And it's in the end, I struggle with it because I understand we became far too entitled in North America. We expect far too much for too little, and when you're up against someone who's willing to work twice as hard as you for half as much or a third as much, that's a losing proposition in the end. But we are also in the driver's seat in the sense that we can decide where our dollars go. We can decide where we buy things from. But consumers, again, abdicated all sense of responsibility about that and said, I just want the cheapest thing. And if you want the cheapest thing, well, guess what? Suddenly you can only afford cheap things because you're losing money from your real economy.
Hey,
it's such a complex thing. The global economy is such a complex organism, and you really can't pull money out of one place without having a big impact somewhere else.
Hey, that is a great point. Gordon T. Long made that point in the search for the lowest prices, as Walmart always is advertising. What we've done is we've destroyed the middle class so that we can no longer afford even the lowest prices, and except the only thing that we can afford is the lowest prices on the essential items, meaning the staples, the commodities, the food, that Franken food that we have to sustain our bodies. And as a result, even in China, we can't afford those Chinese jobs. So now they've gone over to Bangladesh and wherever. And in fact, there was an article, and you probably caught it as well, because I know you're better read than I am, that the Japanese companies that were in China, they're fleeing China for those places like Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar, and other places, Bangladesh. The Japanese factories are moving out of China because it's no longer the low-cost producer. And Walmart's got to get the cheapest prices, and they don't care where the stuff is made. China's learning the lesson that America learned 10, 15 years ago when the factories moved to China.
Well, you just made the exact point in a nutshell there. They don't care. They don't care where it comes from or how they get it. They just need the cheapest price. And I think that is the seed of our own destruction right there. If we don't care where we get things or how we get money, or think of the banking system, if they don't care how they gouge profits, if they don't care what ethics they invoke, if they don't care what behavior is rewarded, then you end up with a shit show. You end up with a cesspool of poor morals, poor ethics, poor principles, and you ride the civilization basically into the dirt. So at some point, we all have to care something about what kind of behavior we're reinforcing, what kind of merchants we're patronizing, what kind of things we're choosing to buy with whatever money we have, and that goes for food as well. And so it's, what we pick drives the bus, really, but we abdicate that responsibility to, these ideas that government is somehow in charge of it. That's nonsense. Or that corporations are somehow in charge of it. I go back to individual choice drives a lot that's going on in the world right now. And since you mentioned Japan, let's not forget to note that they just reported very disappointing growth numbers again in the last week. And again goes back to this whole gutting of the hope in QEs, because they were the poster child. They have been the longest at these reflation cycles and continued efforts, and their economy continues to languish. So, they now want to weaken the yen, full stop. They need to, because they want to try and sell things. God knows their population is not consuming very much, given its demography. So, we have to somehow go back to some accountability, some caring about what we buy and where we buy it from, and therein will be the healing. But it's almost like karma. I don't know. It comes back on us. We can go through these speculative, reckless phases and say it doesn't matter. The price is king and capitalism rules. But you end up with this monster that's neither capitalism nor socialism. It's just a kind of a free-for-all, and everybody ends up the lesser for it.
Yeah, it's really the worst of all possible worlds that we're kind of living through now. And until there's this kind of heightening of consciousness that, trying to get the last possible dollar out of every transaction really isn't the most important thing, that there's something more important than that. Until that realization dawns, we're really not going to see much improvement in anything. And hopefully we're in the beginning of this dawn of higher consciousness, human consciousness. Sometimes I think we are, sometimes I think we're not, and maybe that's the sign that it's emerging, Well,
and I think what gives me hope is I notice, and I see it in people around me. I read it and I see it in clips of whatever various shows and documentaries. This realization that more is sometimes a lot less, and that more and more will actually kill you. Right? That it's not about just getting unfettered on being insatiable in your physical wants for food and drink, or bigger and bigger houses and cars, and all that is really a full circle back to destruction in the end. And so when people start to see that once they've had enough and then they get a lot more than they need, they start to go, you know what, I thought this would be more fulfilling than it is. And in fact, it turns out it's not even that good for me. And once you understand that, I think you can see the consciousness and the behavior and the choices start to shift back the other way. And I think we've made quite a bit of progress there, actually. So I'm encouraged by that.
Yeah, me too. I think we're on the path. It's slow, it's steady, but eventually we're going to see the light. Just a matter of time, and can't come soon enough. But till then, we will talk with you in a couple of weeks, and you be well. Enjoy the rest of the summer, because it's short up north where you are. And
there is.
the
short and sweet.
Yeah, the days are getting shorter already, right?
That's it. But again, one thing I like about the change of seasons is it never lets you be complacent about the current condition, right? You're always realizing that everything's fleeting, and at some point, I think that's probably good for people.
Yeah, well, I lived through that for a long time, and I'm really content not to see the change of seasons anymore. But I understand how people find it appealing, but not for me anymore. But anyway, Danielle, talk to you in a couple of weeks. You be well and enjoy the rest of your summer.
Okay, Kerry, take care.
Bye.
The Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.